Good morning, and we are again truly thankful for this day here, but we are also thankful for the presence of each and every one of you. I'm encouraged to see such a large crowd assembled here today. I'm very thankful for that. Go ahead and be turning with me to the book of John in chapter 12, and we're going to be looking primarily in this account, but we will be going some to Mark and perhaps a little bit to Matthew. But John chapter 12 and verses 1 through 8 is where we will be. She has done what she could. When we think about service, perhaps when we think about the need to be humble, maybe we think about perhaps what Paul says to the Philippians chapter 2, and following the example of Christ, and we should. But there are other accounts that are found in the scriptures that demonstrate this as well, and that's exactly what we are going to look at. Now, what's interesting about this account, and really just in general about the way the New Testament is arranged, and especially the books of Matthew through John, if you look at just Matthew 26, or if you look at just Mark chapter 14, the identity of this woman, you would conclude, is anonymous. But yet, when you come to John's account, her identity is revealed. Verse 2 of chapter 11. She is revealed to be Mary, the sister of Lazarus. And we see that here in chapter 12. So I want us to consider twofold this morning. Number one is that an act of humility and an act of service is something that is to be remembered. But also we need to recognize that such things may be noticed. Now, when you look at these accounts, and especially when you put all three of them together, I believe that we can safely conclude that when Mary came and performed this act, that she did not expect, nor did she anticipate any recognition, but yet it was given to her nonetheless. The first thing that I want us to consider is the occasion for this gathering. Then, John 12 and verse 1, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. So we're told where this was. We are told what the occasion was. Now, when you go, for example, to Matthew 26 and Mark 14, you'll find there that this was in the house of one who is identified as Simon the leper. Now we have present here as well, we have Lazarus, whom had been dead but brought back to life. We have Simon, who undoubtedly had been cleansed of his illness by Jesus at some point in time. And then we have, of course, the disciples. We're told the purpose for this gathering in verse 1, 6 days before the Passover. They were making their way to Jerusalem, but they stopped over here for a time and anticipation for that. So keep in mind that this was not the Passover itself, but was in the time leading up to it, in a time of preparation. So they were gathering for the purpose of going forth to worship. Worship, as we've noted before, involves preparation. Worship involves sacrifice. In this case, and the observance of the Passover, it would be the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. But also it was a time to give honor, as is all worship. Whether it be the Jews in this time or whether it be us in the present, when we come together to worship, we are gathering for the purpose of showing reverence and honor to God, our Creator. So now that we think about who was assembled, I want us to think about the significance of that. We have the cleansed leper, Simon. Again, he's identified in 2 of the 3 accounts as Simon the leper. We know that on other occasions in his ministry, Jesus had healed lepers and cleansed them of their illness and that dreaded disease. And we know that he brought the dead back to life. And on this occasion, Lazarus, perhaps the greatest of Jesus' resurrections, the most well-known perhaps. We need to think about the significance of that. Just as he had cleansed Simon of his physical malady of leprosy, so he cleanses us of the spiritual malady of sin. And just as he brought Lazarus back from the dead in a physical manner, so it is with us. He takes we who are dead in trespasses and sin, as the scriptures say, and gives us life. And then we have the disciples, those who were devoted to him, those who were going to be tasked with the mission of carrying on the spreading of his word after his time of departure. And we too have that great and solemn responsibility. So we can see from these short passages here that worship, again, involves preparation, sacrifice, and showing honor. But in showing honor, to whom is honor to be given? Well, we see in this account that Jesus was the guest of honor. Verse 2 of John chapter 12, there they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. They made him a supper. Jesus was an invited and welcome guest into this home. Is he an invited and welcome guest into our home? And do we show him and give him the honor that is due? But also, let's not overlook Martha. Martha served. Now there's a parallel account. It's perhaps not this same account, but a very similar account. You go back to Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. You recall several weeks ago we had a lesson about that particular text, and it was there in that context that Martha complained about the serving. But nonetheless, we see her here in this role. We need not forget those who devote themselves, and it should be all of us, but we should not forget those who devote and dedicate themselves in acts of service to the Lord. But not only was he the guest of honor, but it was attended by those who had in some way been impacted by what Jesus had done for them. Present were those who had accepted him and those who loved him. And so it should be when we come to worship. We should be able to say that each of us in some way have been impacted by what Jesus did for us. But also within that, if we're going to be his disciples, we must be willing to accept all of what he taught, did, and instructed. And we too, just as they did on this occasion in John 12, we should show him the proper honor and reverence that he is due. But also, we need not forget Mary. When we come to verse 3, John 12, then Mary took a pound of very costly oil, spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. And you can see again the parallel accounts to that, Matthew 26 and verse 7 and Mark 14 and verse 3. So not only had they come together to show Jesus honor, but in so doing, she took and gave unto him the best of what it was that she had to offer. Now notice the language that is used in the text, very costly. You go to Matthew 26 and Mark 14, and you'll see similar language that is employed by them. So the idea behind that, of course, would be speaking of the approximate monetary cost. Now others have delved into estimations as to what the cost of that would be in today's currency, and quite costly to say the least, just as it would have been in the first century. But that isn't necessarily what matters. There's a deeper point and a more significant meaning here than just what it would have cost in terms of dollars and cents. She made a sacrifice. And that is what sacrifice is the giving of something that is of value and significance to us. And she gave it in devoted, dedicated service to the Lord. Notice what John says as well. Again, the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Now again, I understand here he's speaking of the physical side of it, a description of what took place. But again, we do not need to lose sight of the significance of that. It was something that would have been pleasing. Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, talks about a sweet-smelling aroma, that which is pleasing to the Lord. You go to the book of Revelation and you find the imagery of the incense representing prayer, that which is pleasing and being brought before God. But she gave the best of what she had to give. But I want to drive that home just a little bit. And I want to think about us for a moment and in our worship. And again, I say this because I want us to understand the significance of this, but I also want to say this. I don't know your hearts. That's between you and the Lord. But please take this in the spirit in which I intend it. Do we sacrifice and give unto the Lord the best of what we have? Just something for us to think about. But we see from this that our acts of service should be done with sincerity. Again, she went in there probably not anticipating nor expecting any recognition for what it was that she had done. But she did it nonetheless, bringing her best. But now, I want us to shift focus just a little bit. And I want us to consider this application as well, is that an evil heart should not be an obstacle to sincere, pure devotion. Now, I want us to think about it for just a moment. I want to go just a moment to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14 and verse 4. And I want us to notice how this is narrated in this account. Mark 14 and verse 4. And here we're told after she did this, but there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. and they criticized her sharply. The New American Standard Translation renders that rebuking. Now, when you come and look at it in Mark 14, the they there is referring to the disciples. But you go back to John chapter 12, and you see that it was Judas. And you will see why it was Judas. When you go back to John 12, and we find this, verse 5, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. Now, we'll come back to that here in just a moment and say a little bit more about Judas, but I want us to consider this, is that when you look at someone such as Judas, and you look at that heart of greed and covetousness, because that's exactly what it was. Remember, in Colossians, Paul says that covetousness is idolatry. He didn't say that it was like it. He didn't make it an analogy. He said it is idolatry. And that's the idea of being envious of what others have and desiring it for yourself. But you see what Judas did here in John 12 and verse 5. Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Judas and those like him, they will, with false piety, exploit the faith for their own personal profit. Second Peter chapter 2, for example, the epistle of Jude, they talk about men such as this. But also men such as Judas, they will present a facade of sincerity. See, notice how Judas framed this question. But we need to understand the intent behind it. It wasn't because, as the text tells us, that he had any actual concern for the poor, but rather it was because he wanted to take that for himself and for his own profit. But also, the ungodly, like Judas, they will influence sometimes the otherwise faithful. Do you think the other disciples would have complained about this if Judas had not? Probably not. But see, that's what men such as Judas will do. And I dare say there are still men in this world today, even in the Lord's body, so-called, that will have the heart of Judas. That spirit is still there. But we need to beware of it. But also what we see from this is that the ungodly will scapegoat the godly. They were not rebuking Judas for his covetous heart, but rather they were rebuking the faithful for her sincere and dedicated devotion. They were persecuting the godly. And we can see that Mark 14 and 5 as we just read, and here in John 12 verses 5 and 6. But again, they did it for their own gain. But we also need to ask, how many times, and I try to keep a watch on myself, but how many times have we seen others, let's say, spend money, perhaps for a purchase of something, and then we, who had nothing to do with that in the first place, criticize how they allocated that, and we say, well, that could have been given to the church. What we don't know is that they have probably given more to the church than they would have ever thought to have spent on whatever it is that we're complaining about. Or maybe sometimes the church will allocate funds in such a way that others will question and complain about that. We need to be careful that we don't become Judas. We want to be Mary, but we need to be careful that we don't have the heart of Judas. So may it never be said of us that we have exploited the faith for our own personal profit, nor should we let the ungodly influence us to have that evil heart. But also, and this is going to be the next point, is that we need to serve and let the Lord deal with the wicked and the ungodly. So now let us consider the Lord's reply. And we see it here, John 12 and verse 7 and 8. But I want to turn just a moment. I want us to turn back to Matthew and Mark's accounts. Matthew 26, verses 10 and 11. And then Mark 14, 6 and 7. But in Matthew 26, and we come here to 10 and 11, we find these words of Jesus, and the statement that we're going to see him make is one that's probably going to appear familiar to us, but maybe we've never considered the context in which it was spoken. He says, Matthew 26, 10 and 11, but when Jesus was aware of it, that is what they were saying, what they were saying and their complaining, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always." Why do you trouble the woman? He's rebuking them for their insincerity, their covetousness, and their, in general, evil hearts. And so when he says that, why do you trouble the woman? He's telling them it was they, not her, who had done wrong. We see Jesus on this occasion defending the faithful, given not only at her defense personally, but also in the defense of a good work. We need to be careful that we do not criticize those who do good works just because they may not do the same thing that we do, or that they may not do it in the manner in which we do it. Let's make sure that we do not trouble one another. But also, we need to see what this good work was. It was in preparation for what was to come. When he says, "The poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always," he's telling them that there would be ample opportunity for them to serve the poor. Their complaint was what? This could have been sold and given to the poor. He's telling them that there would be time for that to come. But in the present moment, he was soon going to be departing. He was soon, in just a few short days, he would face all manner of mockery and ridicule. He would be scourged, spat upon, placed upon the cross, and then rise on that third day. He's telling them that there was something greater and that other opportunities would come. And we need to remember that as well. It's well and good to serve the poor and the needy, and we should do that, and I'm grateful that we do that here as a church. But we need to understand that in our quest to do that, that we do not forget the service of the Lord. But also we need to think about the service and remembrance. In Matthew 26, 12 and 13, he goes on, "For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." What was this work that she had done? Did it for my burial. We also need to remember as well, now think about this. She gave him this. She made this sacrifice while he was still yet living. Now let's think about that for a moment. She gave it while he was yet living. We too need to remember that. We need to remember that our Lord still lives. And we need to give our sacrifices unto him. But also, she showed him the honor and she received the blessing and the promise that she would be remembered. Have we thought about this statement? I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world. He's making a promise to her that it would be remembered. The promise was that it would be remembered. We need to defend the faithful, defend good works, and remember and proclaim what others have done. When those things are worthy of imitation, when those things are worthy of being spread. And we must maintain that heart of humility. But remember, the scriptures also tell us to give honor unto whom honor is due, Romans chapter 12. And we would do well to remember that. But also, again, we need to be cautious that we don't become Judas. But rather let us have the heart of Mary. Let us sacrifice to the Lord that which cost. And let him deal with the critics. If it be the case that there are any here this morning, that maybe you realize that in your life of service to the Lord, maybe you realize that you are, for whatever reason, going to the wayside. We want you to come back. The Lord wants you to come back. And we want you to have that heart of Mary. Come in humility. Let us help you, pray for you, pray with you. But also, if you are here today and you have not done those things, we too invite you to come. Come in simple faith that he is the Son of God, believing and affirming that, turning away from your sins and repentance, confessing that faith, and being immersed into the water for the forgiveness of sins, having them washed away. Acts 22 and verse 16. Whatever your need might be, we would invite you to come while we come together and sing.
Number 909.